I would like to invite Ariel Halevi, who would introduce himself to you and adjust the evening.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what do the tiles in the supermarket have anything to do with sales and profitability? This is a true story. A VP of sales in a supermarket chain decides this is how he's going to give his chain a competitive advantage. He decides to remove the tiles in aisles number 2, 3, and 7 specifically, and replace them with the same exact tiles, only 1/4 of the size. So now every place there was a tile, there are now 4 tiles. Same color, same design, same supplier. And as a result of doing this, he promised the CEO not only would sales go up in these aisles, but profitability would go up. Why did this work? Anybody have a guess? Can I repeat the question? That costs extra. Okay. They replaced the tiles in a supermarket. Instead of large tiles, they put small tiles, but only in aisles number 2, 3, and 7. And as a result, sales went up in these aisles. And as a result of that, they renegotiated with their suppliers. And they said, if you want your product to be in one of the aisles that sells more, you have to give us a special discount when we purchase the merchandise. So now not only did volume go up, but profitability went up. My question to you is, why did this work? All the other aisles were closed. No. Keep going. What? People did, yes, why did they walk slower? Nope. What? It was bumpy. So what if it was bumpy? So the cart, okay, so they walked slower because the cart was bumpy. So why did that cause people, I mean, why? What happened? It wasn't, did it slow it down physically? You're right, but I want the full answer. Yes. It felt more homey because it was less big. No. Yes.
When they walked slowly, they looked from the eyes.
You're right, but my question is, why did they walk slowly? There was a specific psychological the noise. What about the noise? Wow, you're like 99% there. Okay. You walk into the supermarket, you take a cart. The wheels of the cart, they hit the cracks in between the tiles. Every time they hit it, you hear a cluck, 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 and then people walked into aisle number 2. They were walking the same speed, but now they're hearing cluck, 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 cluck. Within 10 paces, people slowed themselves down. And when they measured, people slowed themselves down back to the original cluck, 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 until they got out of these aisles and back into the ones with the bigger tiles. That's why they ended up spending more time. More time, like you said, more products. Why is this such a groundbreaking story when it comes to interpersonal communications, which is my field? I've been specializing in interpersonal communication, persuasion, and influence without authority for 17 years. To me, this example is paramount to the mistakes we make almost every day when it comes to our ability to persuade other people. I started out as a competitive debater. I was captain of my debate club, and the more competitions I was winning around the world, the worse my social life became. I don't know if you know debaters. They're the most annoying people in the world. And the better I was doing competitions, the less people were willing to talk to me at home, and I couldn't figure it out. And then it occurred to me, there is something fundamentally more important than the regular approach we use on a day-to-day basis, which is to have the right argument, to be correct, to prove the other person wrong, to have all the facts, to be more educated, which are all critically important things. But these are not the things that are going to determine the outcome of an interaction you have with somebody that you're trying to influence. There's something that has to happen before, something we call the persuasion equation. It's a very, very simple formula. You equal what? What do you need to equal? What's the key factor affecting your ability to influence other people? If you had to guess? Trust. What I'm talking about may lead to trust. But you're right, trust is not only critical, it's one of the biggest problems the corporate environment is dealing with today. How we exist and how corporations are designed to work today is in complete contrast to over 250,000 years of our social evolution. And one of the things we've lost as a result of that is trust. And that's why companies are finding it very difficult to drive collaboration internally and with their clients. But what I'm talking about comes even before trust.
First impression.
What about it? What's so important about the first impression? What do I want to have happen at the end of that first impression?
Emotion.
What?
The other person will have very positive emotion.
Yes, that's exactly right. What we're looking for is that the other person will have a positive experiential memory. What we know over the last few decades as a result of Nobel Prize-winning research in behavioral economics is that our brain has two operating systems that operate in parallel. They're called System 1 and System 2. System 2 is a relatively modern system. That's what we're taught in school. How to deduct, the scientific method, trial and error, looking at the facts, building arguments, looking at both sides of the story. That's a modern system. And then there's System 1. It's been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years for the Homo sapiens. System 1 doesn't do all that. System 1 just jumps to conclusions. System 1 feels. It has a gut feeling. It works on rules. If then, even if those rules make no sense in the modern world. What percentage of our time is System 1 in control, and what percentage of our time is System 2 in control? If you had to guess.
90-10.
90-10 in favor of which one? One gets 90%. Do I hear a 91? Going to 95% of the time, even in life-threatening situations, when we have to make decisions that could affect our lives. When we're talking to the doctor, 95% of the time, System 1 is in control. And so this was mind-blowing for me as a debater, because I was taught to get up on stage, give the three best arguments I could about a topic, demolish the other team, and walk out. That doesn't work in real life. And when you think about how you approach people in the workplace or at home, which system are you trying to appeal to most of the time? So most people are trying to appeal to System 2. All the presentations at work, all the features of the product, all the analysis, the business plan. We are a world designed and taught to focus around System 2, when in fact System 1 is in control 95% of the time. Now for me to create a positive feeling for somebody, I have to be able to have a certain skill. I have to be able to do something that has nothing to do with the other person, only with me. And this is where we introduce the concept of emotional intelligence. Most people, most debaters, most advocates, most investors, most entrepreneurs think that what they need to do is be very intelligent, which is not bad, it's important. But when it comes to persuasion, when it comes to getting somebody else to willingly accept a point of view and be willing to act on that point of view and want to talk to you again next time, is going to be the measure of your emotional intelligence, not theirs, and not your IQ. Why is it about emotional intelligence? Because the only way to truly create positive experience for other people is to delay gratification when engaging with somebody in a conversation. If you have that as a foundation, everything else you do will be phenomenal. If you don't have it as a foundation, all the other components that have to do with good arguments, good foundations, good references, still very important, but you're going to have to work 10 times harder. They have done experiments over and over and over again with people, asking them, why do you think something? Why do you support a certain political candidate? And the person said, well, in one case, they asked people about Bush, and they said, well, because Bush didn't support stem cell research. They said, oh, that's interesting. And they gave them all the information about how, under the Bush administration, budgets for stem cell research went up. 3 months later, they pretended to call for some unrelated survey and asked all these questions. And one of them was, what do you think about Bush? We don't support him. Why? Because he doesn't support stem cell research. Information in, information out. What people remember is their feeling. For us to be able to influence their feeling, we have to first be able to avoid 3 gratification traps, which I'm going to show you in the next few minutes what they are. Then we're going to try it out in this room. And I'm going to try to bring up some topics that could cause some discomfort in the room. And get you to have an open conversation about them, except every time you fall into a gratification trap, I'm going to stop the conversation. I'm willing to put a wager that I'm going to have to stop the conversation by the end of the first sentence uttered in this room. That's my bet against you. You have to prove me wrong. What is a gratification trap? A gratification trap is a dynamic in a conversation that gets me to choose my satisfaction over the satisfaction of the other person. When you're trying to persuade people, you have to choose between instant gratification for yourself or lasting impact over the other person. You can't have both. Most of us go for instant gratification. What would be a gratification trap? Something that tempts us to compromise the experience of the other person in our own favor. If you had to guess. Ego. That's one of them. It's called the need for credit. We need credit. Tell me if this has ever happened to you before. You're in a group setting, you're trying to talk about a policy. How should we do this? How should we produce this event? What should we do with this product? And you say, well, what if we did this and this and this, and we could work it out within a few weeks, and it would be perfect? And everybody's like, yeah, that's not going to work. Okay, moving on to another idea. Meeting number 5, 3 weeks later, somebody else in the room that people generally like says, look, I have an idea. Why don't we do this and this and this, and then we can ta-ta-ta-ta. And everybody's like, that's a great idea. That look on your face is exactly the gratification trap I'm talking about. That idea in the 5th meeting is exactly the one you gave in the 1st meeting. What is our likely response to that situation? What? Unfair? Why is it much worse than unfair? You're listening to the group reach a conclusion. You're like, are you serious? Are you guys kidding me? I brought this up 3 weeks ago. No, you didn't? Yes, I did. I'm going to start recording these calls. This is unbelievable. This is a crazy gratification trap for the one reason, which is the other two, you're going to find yourself arguing with people who don't agree with you. When it comes to credit, you're arguing with people who do agree with you. They just reached a conclusion that you support. What are you doing about it? Are you saying this is a good idea? No, you say this is my idea. And an entire argument starts. I'm not being critical of anybody. We are educated from a very, very early age to get credit. You have to get credit. Only one person can win the gold medal. They asked athletes who won silver, they said, you never win silver, you lose gold. Only one person can have this. Only one person can get the scholarship. Only one person can be number 1. So if I don't get credit, how am I going to get the end of the year bonus? How am I going to get credited and promoted if somebody else gets the credit? So we are surrounded by a culture that's educating us to fight for ego, but when it comes to interpersonal dynamic, that comes at our own expense. That's gratification number 1. Trap. What are the other 2? If you had to guess. Okay. How many times has this happened to you? You're sitting with a friend and having a conversation about something not too important. And things start getting heated up and up and up, and you start raising your voice, and you start yelling, and how could you be saying that, and you're out of your mind, and you're starting to get angry. And this could be about some sport or about some inconsequential event. But things start escalating. Why? Because this gratification trap talks about false sense of urgency. We live in a situation where you get into an argument with somebody, and if they don't agree with you, you walk into the conversation feeling, if I don't get this person to agree with me by the end of this conversation, people will die. I don't care that we're in a family dinner. They don't agree with me now. And then what that does, it causes the same thing that we did before with the credit. It causes argumentation. I don't know about you, but people wouldn't speak to me because I would never let the conversation end. Can we please move on to something else, Ariel? We were a group of friends having beer. We just happened to talk about politics again. Can we please move on? Enough. I've heard enough about Trump and Obama and all the others. Can we move on? Sure, Eitan, just tell me at least you agree with this. I don't agree with this, but I want to move on. How could you possibly not agree? And you start dragging it on and on and on. To say it to his back that way. Okay. Only to his back, right. Okay. When we do these things, when we violate the persuasion equation, we are creating a negative experience for the other person. we are not just going to end up paying a tactical price, which is they're not going to agree with us this time. We end up paying a strategic price. People who don't enjoy speaking with me will not want to speak to me about other topics as well. I would sit down to Friday night dinner with my family. My mom would be like, so what do you think about this thing that's happening in Iran? And I have 3 older sisters. And like, well, I'll tell you, Iman. She's like, wait, Ariel, why don't you give your sisters a chance? But we haven't even started. Yeah, but you're going to hog the conversation. You're not going to let anybody speak. That's the reputation you end up getting when you're trying to be always right, when you try to get credit, when you're under a sense of urgency that doesn't allow you to move the conversation to something else. You think you're pushing yourself forward, but you're pushing the other person not only away from your position, you're pushing them away from you. And that can have a very, very high cost. So sense of urgency, need for credit, there's one more. The need for absolute certainty. There's a lot of gray area in the world. If I brought up some very sensitive topics in this room, it would be very hard to find the middle ground because our brain, our system 1, doesn't like uncertainty, doesn't like complexity. If I'm an environmentalist and I believe in helping the environment, and somebody says, look, I want to suggest a new policy where we're going to give free bus rides between cities so that we can lower unemployment somewhere so that those people can have a better social economic welfare. I'm immediately going to jump up and say, absolutely not. More traffic, more pollution, we have to protect the environment. The other person's going to say, don't you agree that we need to help the other people get jobs? Even though that is a valid argument, I cannot afford to accept the argument because it may undermine my conclusion. When in fact, 2 opposing arguments can completely be valid at the same time, but we don't deal with that very well. So we need certainty. When somebody presents a very strong argument against my point of view, the way this trap works is, the more valid the argument, the worse my response. When you think about it, is ridiculous. And it also works with, the closer the person is to me, the worse the response. If yes, this is what we call tragic laughter. Okay? No, because if I'm dealing with a stranger and they don't agree with me, okay, but my mother, my sisters, my best friends, et tu, Brutus, how could you possibly do this to me? It's a sense of betrayal. Our responses to these things create a very negative experience for the other person, and it undermines our ability to give them valid arguments. What we need to do is adopt a new set of behaviors that can actually lead to a situation where I am delaying gratification for myself, and in the process, increasing my chances of getting the other person to agree with me. Again, I'm not only thinking about how can I get this person to agree with me on this topic. I'm thinking, how can I build rapport with this individual so in the next 10 conversations we have, this person will gravitate to me because I will be the person that they feel comfortable having a conversation with. That's why debaters in college who are very successful are the absolute worst persuaders in real life. I'm talking about a binary system.
How about some probabilistic kind of truths and falses?
How about truth and falses as far as what they say?
A great scale of probabilistic possibilities.
About the outcome of a conversation.
Yes.
I am only talking about probability. I'm arguing that the probability of somebody agreeing with you, even when the foundations of your argument are very, very solid, are lower. The probability will be lower because they will be dealing with a discomfort that they don't want to have to endure, even if you're right. And one of the greatest examples was in television. How many people here know the show House? Don't be shy. It's an amazing show. Okay. House is a TV show. You know it. Okay. The House is a classic example of System 1 going to war with System 2. House is a classic example of System 1 and System 2. In the show, this doctor is the single greatest talent in diagnostics, in diagnostic medicine, for anybody in America who has symptoms that can't be figured out. And the show is a race to him and his team figuring out the answer. There's only one problem with this doctor. Anybody want to share? He's out of his mind. He's one of the most disgusting individuals you're ever likely to run into. By the way, just to give you an example of the probability issue and all that stuff, In medicine today, hospitals are investing tremendous amounts of money now to improve the patient-care dialogue, the doctor-patient dialogue, because they've realized that the chances of people getting healthy are affected not only by what the doctor says, but how they say it. And they ran a tremendously powerful experiment. They recorded a doctor, I think this was in French, speaking to a patient. They recorded it. They cut 3 seconds of it. And they let people listen to the 3-second segment who didn't speak French. Okay, so I don't speak French. I'm listening for 3 seconds to a doctor speaking to a patient in French. And then the people were asked a simple question. Will this doctor be sued for malpractice? You know what the forecasting accuracy was? 90%. 90%. Why? Because System 1 is extremely refined in its ability to diagnose and decipher signals that System 2 can't keep up with. And there are many, many different examples of how that works. And if I'm a doctor and I'm giving you the right diagnosis, but I'm not treating you properly, I'm not displaying empathy, I'm not making sure you understand, I'm not taking the time because I have to deal with other people, the likelihood, statistically, that you will accept my diagnosis and not want to go to somebody else is lower. And they've tested this. They had 2 doctors in the same medical profession tell a patient that they have to undergo life-threatening surgery. Patients asked, how dangerous is the operation? Dr. A was instructed to say 90% of these operations are successful. Dr. B was instructed to say 10% of these operations fail. This is called positive versus negative framing. It's a purely non-rational agent. It appeals only to System 1. At the end of the day, people who were given negative framing asked to speak with another doctor or go through the diagnostic again. Even though statistically the number they were given was identical to the one the other doctor said, 1 to 9 chance. Our brain is very refined. By the way, that's part of the problem of the modern world. This is destroying communication. Remote virtual communication is filtering away so much data that you're seeing me now. This is a feedback loop. You just nodded. I can see that. Okay? I can also see the frowns. Kidding. Now, I can see it. I can see people smile. I can see them. I can see expressions, and my brain can decipher these expressions. But when I'm on the phone or if I'm writing an email, I don't get that information. And so technologies, for communication technologies are improving, but communication skills are actually decreasing. And in between is what we call the communication gap. And that's why this field is so important. So let's try this out. I want to start a little argument here, okay? Raise your hand if you agree with the following statement. Voting should be legally mandatory. If you don't vote, in the very least, you get financially fined. Raise your hand if you agree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll repeat. If you agree with me, raise your hand. Voting on election day should be legally mandatory. Like in Australia, like in Peru. In Peru, you can't get a mortgage, right? You cannot get a mortgage if you can't prove that you voted in the last elections. In Australia, if I recall correctly, you get a $500 fine. Should election voting be mandatory? Raise your hand if you agree. There we go. Now we're just going to do a little mathematical test. Raise your hand if you disagree. Yeah, that's what okay. Interesting. Who said they agree? Raise your hand again. Who agree? Okay. Tell me why. Tell us why.
Okay, I'll tell you why. I was born and raised in Venezuela. And in Venezuela, actually, you had to vote. There was no other option. So I grew up with the idea that I had to vote. So that's why I think until today that I should vote.
But if you tried to convince everybody in this room to adopt our position on this, what would you tell them? Why?
I would tell them that it's important for us to vote so we can make a difference and people should help decide who do we want to be in power.
Got it. Who disagreed? Who raised their hand against? Okay, you think you can do it without a mic? I want to hear your answer, and I want you to answer her. You're like, why did I raise my hand? I was just yawning. Speak up.
There's 2 points, I think.
you fell into a trap? Why did he fall? Which trap did he fall into? I'm reminding you again. We'll do it in the order that we presented it. The need for credit, false sense of urgency, the need for certainty. Which one do you think you fell into? Which one? So, I actually think the I personally is a good touch. It's not, it's an absolute truth. Somebody said here, which one did he fall into? Certainty. Why? I think he fell into the sense of urgency. Why? You just heard her express an opinion. Is there anything in her opinion you agree with? Can you think about reasons why mandatory voting? Okay, imagine if you had done something completely different. Imagine if you had avoided the gratification trap of expressing your opinion, which you were eager, I trapped you into it, of course. What if you had said, yes, I have a different opinion, but I want to begin by saying, I totally see your point. In fact, I think that if we forced everybody to vote, this and this and this would probably happen, and I think they're all good outcomes. There is, of course, another perspective, which is not voting can also be a statement. If you had just added that component, how do you think, what's the difference in her emotional response to you? Why? Thank you. You didn't position yourself against her. You gave her the instant gratification of credit, right? You demonstrated that you know what you're talking about, which means, you know what most people assume that if somebody doesn't agree with them, they must be because they're ignorant. If only you let me speak, I'm not trying to be tough, I want to enlighten you. I just want to impart to you my wisdom so that we can all be wise. Right? That's the general sense. If somebody comes back to me, and by the way, repeating finding the good in what she said, that's a form, again, of non-rational persuasion called mirroring. Is when you turn yourself into a mirror image of the person in front of you. And then it triggers something called reciprocity. People will respond to you the way you treat them. You smile, they'll smile. You'll be aggressive, they'll be aggressive. By demonstrating openness and not falling into urgency around her point, she's more likely to do the same to you. Okay, let's pick another topic, which I know is interesting. Raise your hand if you think high school kids should not be allowed to play full contact football. Why are people looking your way? Okay, raise your hand if you think they should be allowed. Okay, by the way, I'm sorry to point to you again. This is a gratification trap. A second. Oh, amazing. Here's what we're going to do here. Does the insurance cover us for this? Okay. I'm going to give you a chance, because you know her opinion, I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself, and you're going to answer. Go ahead. You don't want to participate. Okay, fair enough. Like our one night out. Why do we have to argue in public? Okay. So, I'll close wait, first, you were in favor of kids not playing. Explain to us why.
Well, I understand that kids really love playing football, and I think it should be allowed if their parents feel comfortable with head injuries.
Okay,
My opinion is that I would not want my kids to have any head injuries.
Okay. Who wants to answer that? She's right. Of course she's right. Now, you just fell into a trap. This becomes a little complicated. You said she's right. You could argue, Ariel, I'm reinforcing something she said. Why did I just fall into a trap? What you did was hurt your prospects. In what way? Who are you trying to convince here? The people who agree with you or the people who don't? When you say she's right, who are you serving?
Those who don't.
In what way?
Double down.
Okay, I can accept that actually. There is truth in that. We know from social experiments that have to do with conformity that as soon as I becomes we, it's harder for people to oppose. They did an amazing experiment where they drew lines on a wall. They drew a line here, and then they drew the same line here, one that was longer above and one that was shorter below, and it was distinctively, the middle one was identical. They had like 6 or 7 people in the room. They were all collaborators. They brought somebody in. They said, we're going to ask you all which of these 3 lines is identical to this one. It was obviously the middle one. And they put the person on the end of the room. They started with the other one and said, which one? Said, the top one. And you see the guy who they brought in is looking like, what? And then they go to the second person. Which one? He says, of course, the top one. And the guy's like looking. Third person, fourth person, the person starts sweating. They get to the last person who wasn't a collaborator, and they say, so which line? He says, the top one. 65% of the time that happened. When one of the other 6 or 7 people said the middle one, 95% of the people said the middle one. So to that point, I agree with you. However, if you know her opinion, and you know there are people who disagree, you might actually voluntarily position yourself as ambivalent in order not to tag yourself as somebody people already know what your opinion is. It leaves you open to explore, not to, this is called messenger status. Your messenger status is what people expect of you. If I'm Israeli, what do people expect of me? Aggressiveness, right? Israelis have one hell of a messenger status. For good or for bad, it's a total sum of expectations. You want to have a neutral messenger status when you're trying to convince somebody. So if somebody says to you, what do you think about this? You could say, listen, it's complicated. On the one hand, on the other, what do you think? Now you might say to me, Ariel, but that's not sincere. Why don't I just say what I think? I'm not asking you to be insincere. I'm asking you to explore both options truthfully before presenting your opinion. That's the idea. So I'm going to give you 5 very quick tips. I'm going to run very quickly in front of them. In your bag, there's this. This covers pretty much everything I talked to you about, so you don't really need to read it anymore. But it also covers the 5 points I'm going to give you, okay? And the concept here is you're not moving slow enough. The counterintuitive approach to persuasion, is that we have to slow down if we want to get faster results with people when it comes to changing their minds. People don't like changing their minds. People like who they are. They associate their opinions with their identity. They feel that if they have to change their mind, there's an emotional price to pay for being wrong, for adopting a new reality. It's frightening, it's uncertain. People try not to do that. And there's a psychological process called cognitive dissonance, which exactly plays into that. How can you avoid this situation? Number 1, don't walk into a conversation saying, I'm going to convince you by the end of this conversation. Say, the more important it is to me to convince you, the longer it's going to take me. I'm going to walk into this conversation understanding that it's going to take me 3 months, 2 weeks, 10 days. The more important it is to you, the longer you should allow it to take. The exact opposite of, I'm going to show you everything now. Number 2, small steps. The smaller the steps you take with the individual, the less resistance you will face. And a small step can be to not talk about it at all for the first 2 or 3 meetings. Let's talk about other things. Let's see what we have in common. Let's find things we do agree about. Then in the 3rd conversation, maybe we can talk about why maybe you should be vegan. Okay, so that's going to take me about 2 years based on the laughter in the room. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go to somebody and say, you realize you're eating an animal that was tortured, right? You realize that you're a murderer. Okay? Probably not going to get you to be a vegan. You might start with, so what did you do last weekend? Small steps. Gradual. The more steps you can create, the less resistance you're going to get in the process. What's the smallest possible step you can take? The smallest possible step is no step at all. If you can find a way of positioning your point of view as a how, not as a what. What are we here to talk about? Being vegan? Nope. We're here to talk about what you believe in. Are you environmentalist by any chance? Let's talk about helping the environment. I'm also very active in helping the environment. Tell me, how did you get into this field? Get the other person to tell you everything they believe in helping the environment, global warming, the whole thing. You might then say that the food industry and the meat industry is a huge cost on the environment. Now, what are we talking about? Are we talking about veganism or are we talking about environmentalism? You are the how, you are not the what. You are the means to achieving what the other person wants to accomplish, which of course means you have to know what the other person is trying to accomplish, which is a classic delayed gratification. I want to talk about being vegan. I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to delay gratification. We're going to talk about you and what you believe in. Tell me more. Let the other person speak. The more they talk, not only the more you're going to learn about them so you can use that to frame your argument, they're also going to love you because people love speaking. Talk to a person about themselves, they will listen to you for hours. There is such a scarcity of attention in the world. We can reach more people than ever before, but they're not listening. We used to only be able to reach 50 to 150 people, but we had them in front of us. I don't think, and I'm not an historian, so I apologize in advance, and really just take this with a grain of salt. I'm pretty sure that 500 years ago, when you were sitting around the bonfire and talking to somebody, they weren't doing this. Yeah, Yep. Right? So we can reach more people, but they're not paying attention. Let people speak and pay attention to them, you'll have their world. That's gratification for you. So how do you find out what people believe in? Step number 4, questions. Ask them questions. And not yes or no questions. I worked with a CEO who told me he was being criticized for being such a micromanager that he wants to learn how not to dictate to everybody. So we started working on leading with questions, and I said, you need to convince me that this wall should be blue, but you can only ask me a question. The guy took the exercise very seriously. He took a notepad and he wrote down everything and he scribbled and erased, and then he's like, I have it. I said, please. He says, don't you agree this wall should be blue? That's not a question. Open-ended questions only. Questions that can be answered with a yes or no do not constitute a question as far as I'm concerned. If you had to convince me to make this wall blue, go ahead. Let's hear it. Why should it be blue? The first, almost in all cases, the word blue appears in the first question I hear in this exercise. Which gratification trap did you fall into? Urgency. What? I love walking outside, especially when it's nice outside. Especially when it's gray. I love London, London environment, winter. What's the problem with what you're doing? Are you really asking about me? You understand? Even if you're not asking me a closed question, you're not really asking about me, which is the 5th principle. The 5th one is talk to a person about themselves and listen to you for hours. If they listen to you for hours, you have a process, and it's a cycle. Ask me again. Why did I pick this shirt? Oh, I love blue. Keep going. You might start by saying, that's a beautiful shirt, Ariel. But I don't want you to ever have to lie, so okay. So let's do this. I love blue. Ah, I love that. What other colors do you like? That's perfect. I love green. I think green and wood, perfect combination. That's why I love this room so much. I wouldn't change a thing in this room. Perfect room. But you also like, you were doing so well. It seemed, why did you fall into that trap?
Because you told me that you like also blue.
That's right, but I love this room. Wouldn't change a thing. What do you do in a situation like that? Yes?
What would you change anyways to make it feel if you had to change something?
I would probably, I think I would probably change a little bit of the lighting. Make it a little bit more yellow lighting. Soft. But, listen, avoid the but. You know what, you're right. You're right, we should mix it up a little. I would add some yellow. Yellow would, I agree with you, you're absolutely right. Let's do the walls in yellow. What's happening here? Yes? Are you asking me as part of the simulation? You want my opinion on? Well, I think that the kind of colors you use to design an environment should be a function of what the environment is meant to serve. And I think that if this were a working environment, probably blue and green would be wonderful, because what they do is they create a calm in an environment that's otherwise very stressful, and that might actually increase productivity. However, in an environment where you already have relaxation, like a place like this, you might actually want to use more invigorating colors, like red and yellow. Now, has anybody considered the possibility of saying to me, that's interesting. So what are you doing tomorrow? I told you to convince me. Did I tell you to convince me now? Did I say that you have to, by the end of this exercise, get me to? That's the urgency. Let's talk, anyway, moving on. The less, and then you can revisit it. Maybe offer me to go to a restaurant that just happens to have blue walls.
I will actually talk to you about replacing the tanks. Yes.
Okay, so I just want to wrap this up very quickly. It can be daunting, this methodology, but in general, learning about persuasion, it can be very daunting. I want you to relax. I want you to understand you don't have to do this in one day, and you don't have to be perfect at it, you just have to be better at it. One of my favorite examples for this, just to build up anticipation. Two friends decide that they want to go hiking. One is a system 2 kind of guy. So they say they're going to meet at 6 in the morning. The guy's there at 5:45. He's got a huge backpack. Everybody's like, in the room. It's interesting when you have a community that knows each other so well. 40 pounds on his back, malaria pills, like whatever, all the equipment you need. His friend is a system 1 kind of guy. He arrives at 6:15. He's got like running shoes, he's barely wearing anything, just a little backpack. And the first guy says, you're out of your mind. We're going to be trekking here for 3-4 days. You're going to be cold. You're going to be uncomfortable. He says, I know. But I read a little, and there are lions in this area. I don't want to have 40 pounds on my back if we run into a lion. You understand? He says, no, I don't understand. You really think it matters what you're wearing? You think you can run faster than a lion? He says, I don't have to run faster than a lion. I just have to run faster than you. Good persuasion and creating positive experience is a relative thing. So if people enjoy speaking with you more than they enjoy interacting with other people in your environment, that already gives you a competitive advantage because the brain can't help but compare. So with this in mind, I hope that you found this valuable. You can revisit all of this stuff in the book that you have in your bag, and thank you very much for inviting me. תודה רבה.